Shalom, shalom, shalom. Baruchim aba'im. Welcome to Awakening Torah Mussar Mindfulness, the weekly public offering podcast and vlog video that we offer from the Institute for Holiness, Kehilat Mussar Mindfulness, looking at the weekly Torah portion from the lenses of Musar in the Jewish tradition and mindfulness from Theravada Buddhism of the Dharma, where we hope and pray to merit that we learn from our ancestors and we learn from God. What is it that we are to learn from the Torah, the book of instruction, to help guide and lead our lives? And in particular for this year, which is dedicated to all of us, coping with, healing, surviving the genocide of October 7th in Israel, and the ongoing daily wars with Iran and its proxies of Hezbollah, of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Houthis, you name it. So this is dedicated to all of us. What is it that we can really take from our tradition to strengthen us, to cope, to get through this day by day? So thank you for joining me. Whether you're joining live now, live streaming from our YouTube channel, please subscribe, or from our website on the blog section, whether you're joining on podcasts, listening through audio, or watching through video, and any of the social media platforms, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, welcome. I'm so delighted that you have committed up to this hour to practice and learn together. I'm Rabbi Chasya Uriel Steinbauer, the founder and director of MATOT-MASEI, the Institute for Holiness, Kehilat Mussar Mindfulness, where we really practice and live this path of Mussar mindfulness on the path towards Kedusha, towards holiness. Today is Wednesday, September 4th, here in Israel. It may be September 3rd where you are. It may be later in the day on September 4th if you're over watching from Australia, New Zealand, or all, the whole area over there. And what is it on the Jewish calendar today? I want to wish you Chodesh Tov. It is the new moon of the Hebrew month of Elul, a very important month where we engage in essentially a cheshbon hanefesh, a counting of the soul, this real self-reflection of how have I behaved in the past year, and what can I do in this last month of purification before Rosh Hashanah, before the new year, to feel that I'm ready. Right now, we always say, Hamelech Basadeh, the king is in the field, meaning Hashem is with us and closer to us right now than any time of the year. And may we merit being in that relationship, serving God by serving others. So that is today. It is the 1st of Elul here in Israel. For some of you, you're still at the 30th of Av. We can say goodbye to the month of Av. And I'm going to be covering the Torah portion. It's actually a double Torah portion at the very end of the whole book of Bamidbar, known as MATOT-MASEI. So we will jump into that. That was done on August 3rd, 2024, and it was on Kaf Chet of Tammuz. It was a while ago. So it was on the 28th of the month of Tammuz. It was back in Tafshin Pei Daled of 5784. So let me quickly tell you, for those of you who like to really follow along, this is very long parshiot. So hopefully you've already learned them and studied them, and this will be a recap for you. Matot is from Numbers chapter 30, verse 2 through chapter 32, 42. And then we continue with Masei, which is Numbers chapter 33, verse 1 through chapter 36, verse 13. So obviously very, very long involved jumping in together today. Before we do, we always cover our kavanot, our intentions for today's practice. May we merit fulfilling them. And as if you're used to this journey with me, then know that we cover the same kavanot each week. Our intentions, B'ezrat Hashem, may we merit them. It's threefold. It's radical self-care, caring for the other, and our relationship with the divine in service. So we see this time together during this awakening of really an act of self-care to strengthen our own souls so we can be of benefit to others in the future. We also are doing this to strengthen our relationship to others and with others so we can be a better conduit of God's good to others when they need us. And finally, to strengthen our relationship with the divine, however you define that relationship or the divine, or however you define the divine. This is something that we engage in to draw closer to God, the creator, so we can be this vessel, this conduit to bring God's good to others when they need us. So for those of you who had vision and are watching, on the screen, you can see these kavanot, these intentions here. For those of you listening by audio, I just covered them. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing now. And we will move into our summary of these Torah portions. Okay, so what's going on here? Essentially, in this double parsha of MATOT-MASEI, nedarim, vows, obligations that you accept upon yourself are covered here. They're like voluntary mitzvot, voluntary commandments. And they have to be taken very seriously. If you make them, it's a whole process. So nedarim, vows, can sometimes be canceled, and that's covered in this Torah portion. Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, our ancestors, they fight against Midian. They win and capture spoils of war and divide it up. And the laws related to that war and the division of spoils, including relationship with human beings who are captured in war, it's all covered in these laws here. And a portion actually of what was won as spoil during the war, it was given to the Mishkan, to the traveling mobile tabernacle where our ancestors worshiped God and were in relationship with God. The tribes of Reuven and Gad want to stay outside Eretz Israel, just to the east of the Yarden, of the Jordan River, where there's lots of room for their cattle. You thought I was going to say for their children. It's not. It's for their cattle. They make a deal with Moshe. First, they'll join Bnei Israel for fighting for Eretz Israel to conquer the land. And then they'll return to live outside of it. This is what we're going to cover today. I'm going to continue with the summary, and then we'll come back to this. The Torah lists all 42 stops that our ancestors made while wandering in the wilderness. Now they're at the edge of Eretz Israel. They are commanded to conquer the land and settle there. And how they will settle there will be established through a lottery. The larger amount of land given to larger tribes with more people, more families. They learn how to divide this land, establishing also cities for the Leviim. And they also include 6 cities which are known as the Arei Miklat, cities of refuge. And if a person accidentally kills somebody, what we would call today involuntary manslaughter, they have to move to one of these cities of refuge. So that's essentially the summary of these 2 Torah portions together. And now we're going to jump into what I think is very important for us to focus on, that pertains to who we are today, what we're dealing with, particularly with this these ongoing wars against Iran and its proxies, and essentially how we can gain strength and maybe even strategy of how we're going to respond wisely and appropriately to what we are witnessing around us. So let's just jump in. So in the end, it's Gad, Reuven, and half of the tribe of Manasseh who end up settling on the other side of the Yarden, the Jordan River. But in the Torah portion, it's only Gad and Reuven who approach Moshe. We don't hear from the other half of Manasseh. So if you pay very close attention to this whole dialogue that is between them, essentially, it starts in chapter 32 with verse 1. And the first thing we're told is that the Reubenites, which is Reuven, and the Gadites, which is Gad, own cattle in great numbers. Yep. And they essentially witness on the east side of the Yarden, of the Jordan, that the land is good for their cattle, calling it cattle country. And they approach Moshe. And I want you to be very careful about this language here if you haven't studied this yet. The language is very typical of ancient Near East negotiation. It's not that they actually were, I don't know if I want to call it good-natured, in the sense I want to give benefit of the doubt. It's not that. But when people first read this, when they start off with their language, for instance, in verse 5, it would be a favor to us, right? Look at this language. Im masanu chen be'enecha, right? If you found grace in your eyes towards us, yutan et haaretz hazot le'avadecha, right? You would give this land here to your servants, la'achuza, as a holding. Al ta'avirenu et hayarden, do not cause us to cross over. Do not make us, right? Do not cause us to cross over the Yarden. So reading this as a modern, if you're not well versed and learned in this kind of type of dialogue in ancient Near East, I would even say it still exists today in the Middle East. But this kind of like, I approach you with what I want, and I say it in such a way to make you think that you are doing me a favor. It's extremely manipulative. Let's just be transparent. They're not actually asking permission. If you go through this whole dialogue, they're not asking Moshe for permission. They're communicating with Moshe in a way to have him come to his senses that he better agree to it, because not agreeing will be catastrophic, will be unacceptable, will be something that he cannot live with, will be worse than these two tribes, eventually 2.5, not crossing the Yarden. So what I mean by this, if you go back and forth with this dialogue, right? Moshe immediately intervenes because he thinks this is another spy episode, the scouts, where you had 10 men out of 12 who come back totally fearful from scouting the land, and essentially voice that fear out loud with storytelling, making it worse, with reactivity, communicating it out loud, their fears, causing essentially total reactivity among the rest of the children of Israel who hear about this, and end up causing this whole plague episode, a whole thing, many lives lost. And then the rest of the children of Israel, our ancestors, essentially have to stay in the desert, in the Midbar, in the wilderness for a long time, for 40 years after this. So I'm just going to give you a summary of this. You can read through where Moshe comes back, because he's so fearful that they're essentially causing a whole nother episode, just like the scouts. And then he goes into where they kind of do this back and forth Middle Eastern style of a compromise formula. This happens in verses 16 to 19. And then Moshe finally acquiesces. They call it acceptance. It's not acceptance. It's he acquiesces. Verses 20 through 24, very smart in his own language, what he includes there from the only power he has at the end. And I'll get to that. So Moshe rejects this at first, right? As I said, verses 6 to 15. He compares this whole, what's happening with God and Reuven right now with the scouts of chapters 13, 14, who ended up undermining the whole unity of Israel. This should sound we got to pay attention. Who today in Israel, through his own fear and manipulation, and it's not Netanyahu, who, along with other people, are undermining the unity of Israel, where he's speaking out, and for instance, in the cabinet, causing disunity there in the middle of a war. So here, Moshe essentially is reminding them that this gets triggered by divine wrath and punishment, which I don't need to say that I'll compare what's going on right now with the whole argument versus ceasefire in order to get perhaps some hostages back versus the impact of going through a ceasefire that will essentially cause another genocide to happen by Hamas, and also does not take into consideration the 700 soldiers, children of ours, who have already been killed in this war, and the children of the Druze population in the Golan who were murdered by Hezbollah, and all the displaced in Israel, the survivors of October 7th, all our soldiers and children who have been maimed and are amputees. I think the number is over 6,000 from this war. All the soldiers who were still out there fighting on our behalf, and their families who are waiting for them to come home. And even more importantly than all of this, I mean, it all matters, but our children and our grandchildren and future generations, we have to think about what is the best policy? What is the best thing in this war, in this situation, right? And so Moshe suspects that Gad and Reuven, like the scouts, are really afraid of the Canaanites. And essentially, if 10 individuals could demoralize the people, all the more so 2 entire tribes. And so the relationship with the scout episode is actually reversed. In the scout episode, it was 2 who were positive and 10 who were negative. In this case, it's 2 tribes who are negative and 10 who are positive. And so Moshe essentially upbraids Gad and Reuven for their selfish disregard for Israel's unity. This is a very similar accusation against the Transjordan tribes in the time of Yehoshua. If you read Joshua chapter 22, verses 16 to 20, and also in Devorah, in Deborah, we read about this in Judges chapter 5, verse 17. So that's the beginning of this kind of back and forth. And everyone knows what happens next, which is Gad and Reuven step up. The language is actually quite interesting. Let's see here. I think it's in 16, verse 16. Right? They step up. Essentially, they reveal, obviously, their true intentions, that they're not afraid, that they have every intention of going in and serving as shock troops and of course they can serve that. Okay, it's not as if they're doing something honorable here. They have to be the shock troops. Why? They're the only tribes entering with no women and children because they're leaving them behind on the east side of the river. So don't fall for this act right here, that they're doing something noble by serving as the shock troops. Okay, this is where you got to pay attention to the manipulation. All right, so they come back and they're like, they interrupt Moshe and they beseech him in a very personal, intimate way, which is like the whole conversation, how this kind of negotiation moves forward. And they say, we'll build everything for our sheep and our cattle and everything, and for our children. And then we'll go in and serve as these like shock troops, right? And like, you're supposed to be like, oh, that's so amazing and wonderful, right? Moshe, in a sense, and this is what I'm going to get to, there's nothing he can do. He has no power here. He cannot not accept their offer. Okay? This is what's very clear. Let's be very clear about this. The only power he has is to elicit God, right? He repeats exactly what God in Reuven says, except rather than merely recording their acceptance, he restructures it in two significant ways. He introduces the name of the Lord, of Hashem, which they did not mention at all, God and Reuven, right? He therefore causes them to impose an oath by eliciting and bringing in the name of Hashem, of the Lord. And number two, he reformulates the pledge into the vow, essentially, into a negative as well as a positive condition to invoke divine retribution if there is non-compliance. Right there should tell you how powerless Moshe was in that moment. If you have to say, you have to vow this, you have to elicit the name of God, and that you will be punished if you don't comply, you're already showing and that you are powerless. So what's the situation? What am I trying to say here? God and Reuven were not requesting permission at all. They essentially were telling Moshe, this is how it's going to be. It's best if you put on face and agree to this. They were manipulating the whole venture by essentially blackmailing. Basically, they knew if they didn't go in and they actually said, we're not gonna go in, we're gonna stay on this other side of the Yarden, have our cattle here, live the good life, they would have caused mass chaos. Again, just like the spies did. And then essentially the other 10 tribes most likely would not have entered. They would have felt abandoned. It would have caused, we can't even imagine, but that's part of our practice here, right? Instead, they come to say, we will do this, right? We will stay in our land on the east side of the Yarden for our wealth and cattle. You will comply, right? You will go along with this, Moshe, because you know what will happen if we don't, right? If you don't agree to this, Moshe. So we'll go ahead and we'll answer. We'll serve as shock troops, look like the heroes. Really, the women and children are being left back on the east side of the Yarden, where all the other 10 tribes have to enter with their women and children. They can't serve as shock troops. Okay, they have to travel with them. They have to build and settle and then fight, right, as it goes along. So it's all a great, guys, right? It's all a great manipulation of that kind language of, oh, please do us a favor. If we found favor in your eyes, grant us this, right? And this is not unlike Hamas during the negotiations with this supposed ceasefire. It's not unlike Gallant and supporters of the ceasefire, right? They want to look like the good guys working for this. They want to use the platform to stay, Hamas wants it to stay put where they are, to stay in power. And they want to remain. They want their land, right? On the east side of the Yarden, metaphorically, right? They want They want Gaza. And the conditions are something that we, Israel, cannot accept, right? Talk about mass chaos. We can't accept that we pull out of Gaza and allow the sadistic, totally inhumane terrorist organization, proxy of Iran, to remain in power. Just join me in a contemplation for a minute, which is a key Mussar practice, of what would happen, what would have happened if Moshe didn't agree. If he turned to God and Reuven and said, oh, no, you are crossing the land with us, with all your family and all your cattle. We all 12 tribes are a family, are an are a nation, and we all will join in this land together. We are having a lottery that all 12 tribes will participate in order to get their lands. And you will join us with everyone else. That is ideally what Moshe should have said. Absolutely. It is unbelievable that God and Reuven had manipulated this to the point where they were outside of the lottery. They didn't even have to participate, right? Because the lottery was dividing up the land in the land of Israel. But who are they? Who are they to cause this when everyone else has to participate in the lottery and split up the land? Okay, this in itself, the Torah doesn't address this, and this doesn't see this as the main issue, but it is unbelievable to me that at this moment they would not join all of their people, the in the land, join in the lottery and split it up. Okay, and that's so Moshe. If Moshe didn't agree, you can be sure that God and Reuven would have said, "Go ahead, the 10 of you, go ahead and enter on your own. We're going to stay here." There's no way God and Reuven would have at that moment joined all the people and entered the land. They had other plans. They had valued their cattle and wealth and staying on the other side of the Yarden. And they knew what power they had in that moment. Because if they were going to go ahead and do that and not agree to enter to fight and to help and still in some way remain somewhat tied to and supporting on behalf of the whole people, they knew that the whole project would be over. That's how much power they had. They could manipulate Moshe in that moment to agree and make it look like he's okay with it. He acquiesced. He accepted that they will be on the other side of the Yarden, and it's shocking. The whole thing is shocking. So this would have caused, in my opinion, great division and fear, jealousy also, that these didn't have to participate in a lottery that could take whatever amount of land they wanted. And perhaps that other 9.5 tribes eventually, including that half Menashe, would not have even entered the land. They just would have been like, we're not doing this. We're not doing this if they are not going to either enter the land with us or participate as shock troops. So this is not unlike, right, of the situation that we face with this whole division and disunity and fight over the land of Gaza and the ceasefire. This whole idea that supposedly there's blood on our hands or on Netanyahu's hands if he doesn't agree to the terms and manipulation of Hamas and those who are supporting Hamas, as if it's up to him solely to bring home the hostages, as if he could just say, okay, I agreed to the ceasefire and Hamas actually really return the hostages. Who are we kidding? Who are we kidding? Wake up to who we are dealing with. They're never going to return the hostages. And they're certainly never going to return all of them. And when a party has that power and knows that and can manipulate that and make it look like the other person has the power to make the decision and make the right decision, which is, okay, I'll give you whatever you want. I'll leave the Gaza Strip and I'll get the hostages back, which is not going to happen, even if Netanyahu agreed to that. This is the same manipulation that Gad and Reuven did. Oh, Moshe, if we found favor in your eyes, please let us stay on the other side of the Yarden. Surely you'll make that decision, Moshe, right? Surely you will agree that we can stay on the other side as long as we agree to be your shock troops. Because if you don't agree, that's what's under it. If you don't agree, you, Moshe, will have blood on your hands because the other 9.5 tribes are going to totally act out in chaos and will not enter the land. And that is essentially what Hamas is doing. Netanyahu and your cabinet and everyone, if you don't agree to this ceasefire, including all the Israelis, unfortunately, who are supporting this idea, right? Hamas's plan, that if they don't agree, then supposedly Netanyahu is responsible for the death or not receiving the hostages. You have to pay attention to the manipulation and what's not being said, what's underneath. Because this is this classic Middle Eastern form of great manipulative negotiation. And it's a real problem because when you have a people, which you have so many people here in Israel right now, who feel so powerless over the situation. And when people are powerless, they're desperate. And they'll hold on to almost anything, even if it's a lie. They're not seen clearly. They only can operate based on what they want, what they wish for there to be. And that's no way to live. That's no way to make policy, especially on behalf of a whole citizenship, population, and for future generations. The stance that I want the hostages back no matter what I have to give in return is so irresponsible and dangerous. I have nothing more to say about it. Reckless. I understand the feeling behind it, the desperation to get one's family member back. And if you want to really keep the unity of the people, really think about future generations of how to care for our population and to make sure that our children and grandchildren are here in our ancestral land long term, you must see things more as gray, as nuanced, that it can't just be black and white, either or. If you feel that you're acting out of desperation and powerlessness, that is a sign in the practice to take a pause. You have to feel what's going on in the body. You have to feel. And then you must think of your obligation to your whole people and our grandchildren and future generations. You can't think of just of your child in Gaza, as painful and awful as that is. This is where you're beginning to see the fault lines in Israeli society that has existed at all points in Israeli society, but you have to decide in the end which is going to win out, right? Which is going to be here for longevity. It is the secularization of society and mostly secular Jews, who of course want their family member back. And across the board, if you look at the families of the Tikva Forum, they're mostly religious Jews. Those are the families of hostages in Gaza who are saying, we don't agree to a ceasefire. We want you to continue to fight and destroy the rest of those tunnels. So there's no way for Hamas and any future Hamas, any future Palestinian terrorist organization to function, go in, do the job, always attempt to save the hostages, but they're thinking of their larger of their people. And this is where you see these fault lines, because the secular Jew is more dedicated to their nuclear family and to their immediate child, and the religious to the And with compassion, we can honor and understand how it feels for these secular Jews, but we must not allow that to dominate. We must consider, and so is the obligation of our government, right? The obligation of our leadership is to serve what the majority of the Israelis want, what is beneficial for the majority of Israelis long term, for the next generations. And I know that's terribly hard to practice, to carry that responsibility, and to live with those decisions. And so I remind us, in closing, before we move into our mindfulness meditation practice, that at the end of the book of Bamidbar, of Numbers, when we close out MATOT-MASEI, in completing the book of Numbers, we reflect on the Torah's pervasive genealogical interest, right? There are 10 generations from Adam to Noach, 10 generations from Noach to Terach, which is Avram's father, who becomes Avraham, our father, father of the Jewish people. And then 10 generations from Avraham to Banot Zelofhad, the daughters of Zelofhad. The ending of the wanderings of our ancestors is completely intimately tied to Bereshit, to creation. And Genesis and Numbers are placed in a unified structure. The accounts of the Banot Zelofhad, the daughters of Zelofhad, in Numbers 27 and 36, they form as an inclusion, right, of for all the events and organization of this new generation that essentially is marked by the second census list that we find in chapter 26. And why do we end with Banot Zelofhad? Why do we end with Banot Zelofhad? They come from the tribe of Manasseh, right? So you might think to yourself that that they settled with that half tribe of Manasseh on the east side of the Jordan for their cattle. No, they were a part of the half tribe of Manasseh who settled in the land. Their whole purpose was to perpetuate their father's name by being able to inherit until they had children with someone from their clan, their tribe. And their whole plan was to go into the land, be part of the lottery, to get some of that land based on the honor and memory of their father. And that is what they did. And how do we know that? If I can pull up the source here. It's coming from Yehoshua, Joshua, actually. I just had it right here. Let me pull up the source for you. And if it doesn't come, I'll just summarize it for you. But essentially, if you don't recall who the daughters of Selofhad are, they're the ones that came forward when supposedly all the land that was going to be inherited and passed through the lottery system was only through men. And they said our father had died in the wilderness and he left no sons. Let our Abba's name, our father's name, not be lost to his clan because he had no sons. And then, of course, Moshe turns to God and God says, they're right. Let them inherit, which they agree to marrying within their clan, and their sons will inherit the land in memory of their father. And the end of the story is told in Joshua chapter 17, after the land of Israel has been conquered. And when the daughters appeared before Joshua and Eleazar, the priests, and they asked for their lottery, they asked for their promised inheritance, right? And so, in accordance with Hashem's instructions, they're granted a portion. And 10 districts fell to that tribe of Manasseh in Haaretz, in the land of Israel. And the other was to the other half, the lands of Gilad and Bashan on the east of the Yarden, right? And they inherited what's within, and the rest was assigned to the rest of Manasseh's descendants. This is so profound because these women, these banot, were the tikkun to the spies and their fear and their disunity and the chaos that they cause by mindlessly kind of vomiting their fears out to everyone and causing much reactivity. The daughters were the exact opposite. They stood up in courage and strength. We want to inherit. We want to perpetuate our father's name. We want to settle the land. We want this land, right? So let us take strength from the daughters of Selofhad that we remember the long term. We remember that we're inheriting and holding and strengthening this ancestral land and our people, not only for the memory of our fathers, memory of our children who have died, been killed and murdered in this war, our families, thousands on the genocide of October 7th, 700 soldiers, all those who've been displaced, all those who are coping and healing, and for our children and grandchildren and the 25th generation. That is who we are serving. And we must keep that in mind when we approach our leadership, like Moshe, and also to God, that we hold all of them in mind and not just our desire to have our child back who is a hostage. As painful as that is. Compassion, balance, seeing the larger picture, and not being manipulated by Hamas or any of Iran and its proxies. So with that, we move into our mindfulness meditation. I ask that you assume whatever posture is best for you right now. So if you're having any discomfort or pain, please stand up in like a mountain pose, or walk back and forth, or lie down on a couch or the floor or a bed, keeping your eyes open so you'll remain awake and alert for this meditation. If you're like me, you'll come to the edge of your seat or sit on a zafu, on a meditation cushion, really with an upright posture, because you are created in the image and likeness of the divine. And that's how you should feel when you're sitting up, child of God. And I invite you to close your eyes if you feel safe and comfortable. Otherwise, just lower your gaze so that visual stimulation doesn't come in. If you're new to meditation, welcome. This is mindfulness meditation, where we will listen to my voice as the anchor, pay attention to our breath, whatever arises without reactivity, just attempting to notice it with curiosity, with kindness, We don't have to tell a story about it or identify with it. And similarly, we don't have to push it away, wish it away, practice what's called aversion. We don't have to do that. So instead, we attempt to just kind of bear witness, watching what's going on, not creating another story around it, and being present for what is. So I don't think it's even needs to be stated how exhausted a lot of us feel, which is totally a physiological reaction to the stress of war, and particularly to psychological warfare manipulation that Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran participate in. Not only participate in, but they thrive in it. They do quite well in their sadistic methods. And so that type of psychological warfare, like we're going to send missiles to you and then we never do. We're going to keep the hostages alive, but we'll kill them the minute you arrive. Or they were alive, but then we killed them 2 days before you arrived through execution. This type of stress causes really high highs and low lows, right? And a lot of effect on the liver and the kidneys. This adrenaline system is just exhausted, right? This constant stress. This is something that they actually want and are hoping for. This is why it's so important to practice, to have this sitting meditation, to heal, to strengthen, to recover, even if it's just a small bit, even if it's 5 minutes a day, that we sit and we breathe. And we practice this radical self-care, letting the breath fall to its own natural rhythm. Because this is a healing posture. This is a healing practice. This is saying, I won't let you manipulate me until I am sick and can't get out of bed. I won't let you manipulate me till I feel hopeless. I refuse to be hopeless. I will have faith. I will have hope. I will trust in God. So this is what this practice does. It brings us back to what really matters. It reminds us of our core, the strong moral compass that we know right from wrong, that we are doing the right thing no matter how difficult or painful, that every war is really painful and unwanted, and that we do our best within those guidelines. Really strengthening ourselves and strengthening each other, the only way to be able to bring God's good to others. And so we must rehabilitate. We must take this time. One cannot survive, one cannot stay strong without this radical self-care, without this tapping in, bringing in a sense of ease, of belonging. And one way we do this is to strengthen other midot that support our courage, that support our moral compass. And the midot, the character traits, the personality traits in the practice of Mussar are joy and gratitude. And you might be thinking, how can I have joy and gratitude in this war? this existential war, the clash of two civilizations between the West and jihadism. It is a chiyuv, it is an obligation that every day we sit together from all over the world, allies and Jews alike. And we begin to recall all the joys of our life. This is a practice where you see the joys as little bubbles, as if you're sitting at a waterfall and the water is gently falling on you. You feel the warmth of the water. And in that mist, in that beautiful sun ray, you see these bubbles come up from the froth of the water. And then every single one is a joy from your life. Try to see some right now. Go ahead and do a contemplation. For some of us, it might be the birth of our child, our marriage, spending time with our best friends, walking our favorite dog, petting a warm lap kitty, holding our child's hand as they walk to school on the first day, hugging and holding and smelling the cheek of our grandparent, eating our wonderful favorite food, having some warm hot chocolate on a frigid cold day, talking and praying to God, sharing your joy. Every single joy, see them in the bubbles. In this practice, we call them up. We see all the joys that are with us, inside of us, surrounding us at every moment of our lives. And once we have recalled these beautiful joys, our heart can but open a little to this, what's called hakarata tov, the recognizing of the good, which is really gratitude in Mussar practice. This awakening to the good. Look at all this good in our lives. Look at all these joys. And that, in that moment, if you've arrived at this place, this is our secret. This is our sword. This is our elixir to our resilience and our survival. This is what they can't take away with their psychological warfare. We know our joys. We know what we are awake to that is good. And it's right inside you. And it's right here with others all across the world in this meditation together. And it's right here with all the practitioners in the Institute for Holiness and our different vadim, our groups and our sanghas, sitting and practicing together. And it is here among everyone who lives in Israel. We know our joys, we know our gratitude, and we thank Hashem for another day that we are able to say Moda Ani, Modeh Ani. Thank you, Hashem. I am grateful before you. Grateful am I before you. I recognize the good and I give thanks. And so in this moment, we bow in great gratitude to Banot Slofchad, children, the daughters of Slofchad, for having that great joy and gratitude, that love and dedication to the ancestral land and to their father, to the relationship with their father, to be able to say, Abba, I'm going to make your memory for a blessing. I'm going to fight. I'm going to inherit the land. I'm going to marry within my clan and have sons who will then pass on the land until daughters can inherit someday, and they will. And we benefit from that today. We wouldn't be here without them. So as we enter our last minute of silent meditation, allow these bubbles of joy to pop up for you. What is here today that you are grateful for? If you had your eyes closed during the meditation, gently and slowly open them, especially if you are joining us on video, before you allow the light to kind of stream back into the live stream, Zoom, whether recording or live. And we give ourselves, if it is our practice and we feel comfortable, a deep bow to God, to Hashem, for bringing us to this moment to be able to learn and practice together. Big bow to our ancestors who helped us inherit this tradition, to pass on the Torah, the teachings of the Dharma. We wouldn't be here practicing without our ancestors. So thank you. A big bow to all of us and to yourself for committing to this discipline and practice, for showing up, to really strengthen yourself so that you can be this conduit of God's good to others when they need you. And of course, thank you to anyone else that needs to be thanked. I thank all of our donors and supporters to the Institute for Holiness for allowing us to offer this weekly free public offering podcast and vlog. It is an honor to teach and to practice and share together. So please do reach out to us on the website of kehilatmussar.com. You can find the donation link there, also on our link tree. And be in touch if you would like to sponsor one of the Awakening episodes, either in loving memory of someone or in honor of someone that really inspires you to this day, who maybe was in one of your bubbles of joy. So We will join soon. We'll be entering the book of Deuteronomy, of Devarim. We'll start with the Parsha Devarim, and B'ezrat Hashem, God willing, that will happen soon. So I thank you again for joining today. I believe this is, if I could just scroll down here, this is our 42nd sitting. So it's quite, take care of yourselves. Really enter this month of Elul with this deep, centered moral compass, practicing that joy and gratitude first thing in the morning, seeing the bubbles that can really center your day, so you know the service that you need to do on behalf of Am Israel, on behalf of the Jewish people, on behalf of the state of Israel, on behalf of humanity throughout the whole world. Take care.